The Gemara tells us in Sota and Av Yud Daled, Rav Chama Rabbi Chanina talks about following in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ways, and of course physically we can't follow in his ways. The Gemara talks about you'll get burnt up. So the Gemara explains we want to follow in God's midos. We follow in His activities, and just like the Torah tells us, Hashem came down to do Bikar Cholim, to visit the sick, visit Avram, so too we should do Bikar Cholim. And so too, after they appeared to Yitzchak, after the death of Abraham, that we should comfort the mourners, so too we should comfort the mourners. Just like God takes care of burial, so too we should do burial. So we learn our midos from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And two of the midos that spelled out was, we know God did Nicham Avelim, and He did Bikar Cholim. He comforted the mourners and He visited the sick when He came to visit Avram Avinu. And in life, choosing good from evil is easy in theory, meaning it might be hard to do the right thing, but usually it's clear in a choice between good and evil, what is the good choice, what is the appropriate choice, and what is the wrong choice. But when you got to choose good from good, it's a much harder choice. And the question is, what happens if you have two good things to do? You have someone, let's say you only could do one, or let's say you could do both. Which one should you do first? You have a mitzvah of Bikar Cholim, the mitzvah of visiting the sick, and you have the mitzvah of Nichum Avelim, and the mitzvah of comforting the mourner. And of course, in the case of Bikar Cholim, if someone is in suffix sakana and they need you to take care of their needs, and if not, they might die. So of course, Bikar Cholim wins. We're talking in a case which is most of the time that they have someone taking care of them. If they're in the hospital, the physical needs are taken care of. You have to come and cheer them up, be mispalo for them. So in a case where you have a mitzvah of Bikar Cholim versus a mitzvah of Nicham Avelim, which one takes precedence? So as a general rule, we have a principle that Kavod Achai beats out Kavod Hames. So if you have someone who you can help who's living and someone who's dead already, so the one who's living takes precedence because they need the help right away. So what about in the following case? You have a choice between Bikar Cholim, visiting the sick, and Nichum Avelim. So the Rambam in Hilchas Avel, Perek Yudalid, Halacha Zayin, chapter 14, Halacha 7, writes that Nichum Avelim takes precedence over Bikar Cholim. That first one should do the mitzvah of comforting the mourner and then visit the sick. Why? Because the Rambam tells us because Bikar Cholim is for the living, Kavod Achai, but Nicham Avelim is both for the living and for the dead. And therefore, since it's Kavod Achai and Kavod Hames, it's a double kindness, therefore it takes precedence over a single kindness of Bikar Cholim. How does the Rambam know? That we all know it's Kavod Achai. We do Nicham Avelim, we go to the mourner's home, and we sit down and try to menachem them, comfort them. But where does the Rambam know that Nicham Avelim is also Kavod Hames? So the Meiri writes at the end of Shabbos, the Gemara tells us, what do you do when someone dies and there are no menachem, there are no children? So you should go to the person's house, get 10 people, have a davening there, and then do a Nicham Avelim. So the Meiri writes, Zuhi covered kvodo shel meis. This is kvodo shel meis. So we see there's a concept of nicham avelim, both kavod achai and kavod hameis, and hence the psak of the Rambam. Even the Rambam says I have no explicit source on the matter. Yiraya li that nicham avelim kodem bikor cholim. That is the psak of the Rambam. However, comes along the Or Sameach, other Achronim, and they ask on the Rambam, based on a Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Mem Aleph. The Rambam says there are no sources, but based on all my knowledge of Shas and Poskim and everything else, I come to this conclusion. There seems to be an explicit Gemara against the Rambam. How could the Rambam miss an explicit Gemara? What does the Gemara say? The Gemara says in Daf Mem Aleph, it talks about Anshe Yerushalayim, the Chasidim of Anshe, the people of Yerushalayim, who used to walk around holding the Daled Minim all day. Even though we know Lakaktam Lachem, the Mitzvah Daraisa is fulfilled with a Maisa and the Tila. When you pick it up, and perhaps I'm not Nunim, but the Rabbana, we do it during Halal, etc., but really you do a Maisa Mitzvah. Yet the Anshe Yerushalayim used to walk around with it all day. What about Baal Tosif? Is it a violation of adding to the Mitzvah? So we explain, no, the Netziv writes, others, Tosif writes in Rosh Hashanah, if Minat Torah, all you need is 9 tekiyas. Trua tekiyah, that it says Trua 3 times, and we have a tradition, there's a tekiyah before and after every Trua. 3 times 3 is 9. Tekiyah, 3 times is 9. Today, Machlokas, Rambam, and Rav Haigon, and whether from 9 to 30 is a suffix daraisa. We're not sure what the exact sounds are. So we have to do all the possibilities to fulfill our mitzvah daraisa. Oh no, we fulfill our mitzvah daraisa on any of the sounds. We just want to keep the uniformity. So whatever the pshat is, 9 or 30, we do 100. So how do we add 100 kolos? So Tosas writes, Baal Tosif is only if you change the chefsa shel mitzvah. If you put 5 species in the instead of 4 species in the lulav and esrog. Or if you put 5 parshios in the tefillah, but just to do the same mitzvah many times, that's not a problem. Or as the Netziv writes, the Torah is only giving us the minimum obligation, eating matzah. But for every kizayis I eat more, it's not an issue about Tosef, there is a kiyam ha-mitzvah, not a mitzvah chiyuvis, but I get a kiyam ha-mitzvah by matzah. The Ramban, by Shema Yisrael, he holds pasuk echad is the minimum obligation. Yet, we do 3 parshios, so according to the Rambam, it's not about Ramban, it's not about Tosef, it's a kiyam in Torah. So either way, whatever the pshat is, Anshe Yerushalayim used to shake the 4 species all day. And what did it say? What did it do? And the Gemara says they used to Levaker Chola Ulenachem Avelam Lulavo Biyado. It said with the lulavim in their hands, they used to visit the sick, comfort the mourners, and carry the lulav. So from the order of the Gemara, it would seem against the Rambam. The Anshe Yerushalayim used to do first Bikor Cholim, and then Menachem Abo. However, the Rush has a different girsa. He says, no, Anshe Yerushalayim used to be Menachem Abo and then do Bikor Cholim. So if that's the case, that would fit well with the Rambam. Yet the problem is the Rambam himself in Hilchas Lulav, Perek Zayin, Halacha Chavdalet, Chapter 7, Halacha 24, quotes the way we have it in our Gemara, Bikor Cholem Kodem Nicham Avelim. So what is the pshat in the Rambam? Number one, the Rambam seems to go against our Gemara in Sukkah Daf Mem Aleph. And it's a steer in the Rambam. The Rambam himself in Hilchas Lulav writes, Bikor Cholem, Anshe Yerushalayim did Bikor Cholem, then Nicham Avelim. But in Hilchas Avel he writes one should do Nicham of Avelim before Bikor Cholem, because Bikor Cholem is a chesed for the Chai. Nicham Avelim is a chesed for the chai and the mace. So that's the kasha on the Rambam. So there's a famous machlokes regarding the Rambam versus the Rosh and the Ramban regarding Inyane Avelis in general. The Gemara tells us in Moed Katan and Daf Yudalet Amid Beis, there is no Avelis on Yom Tov because the mitzvah, the Rabbim of Simchas Yontiv, the public mitzvah of Simchas Yontiv overrides the private mitzvah of Avelis. So when you have a conflict, public versus private, public wins. The Machlokas, Rambam and Bali Tosas, whether today Avelis and Simchas Yontiv are the rights of the Rabban. However, you're going to Gemara, the conclusion is the same, that Simchas Yontiv beats out Avelis because Avelis is a private affair and Simchas Yontiv is a public affair. So that's the Gemara. Everyone agrees. The Gemara says there's no Avelis Yontiv. However, there's a machloket in the Rishonim. How far does that go? What do you mean there's no Avelis on Yontiv? Because we know on Shabbos, even though there's no public mourning, but there is Avelis B'tzina. There is private mourning on Shabbos. So what about on Yontif? So the Rambam writes in Hilchas Avel, Perek Yud, Halacha Zayin, chapter 10, Halacha Zayin, Ein davar midivrei Avelis noheg b'Yontif. The Rambam writes clearly there is no Avelis at all on Yontif. Not even, in contrast to Shabbos, where there's Avelis B'tzina, on Yontif there is not even Avelis B'tzina. And the Rosh disagrees and says there is Avelis B'tzina. So it's a machlokas Rambam and the Rosh whether you can have Avelis B'tzina on Yontif. And in fact, the Rav wanted to tie this machlokas in Rav Soloveitchik to another machlokas. On when do the Isuri Avelis, when does Avelis begin? So the Rambam writes, Avelis begins after the Kvura, Stima Sagola. And the Ramban and others say that no, Avelis begins right away, B'Shas Misa. The only issue is that you have to take care of the Kvura, so therefore the Isuri Avelis, the prohibitions during mourning which prevent you from leaving your house and doing other things, that don't apply until after the burial. But strictly speaking, you do have a concept of Avelis even before the burial. So Rav Soloveitchik wanted to say these two issues, whether you can have Avelis B'tzina on Yontif, or whether you can have Avelis even before Kvura, then what is the issue? The issue is, can you separate the Huge Avelis, which are the acts of Avelis, sitting on the ground, covering the mirrors, with counting a day of Shiva? In other words, the day have to be Ola Laminyan Shiva. To have to be one of the 7 days of Shiva for it to have a Nehuge Avelis, or could the concept of Nehuge Avelis exist even at a Shiva? So that seems to be the Machlokas, the Rambam, and the Rosh. The Rambam writes that they're mutually exclusive. If you're not counting Shiva, if it's not Ola Laminyan Shiva, so then you can't have Nehuge Avelis. That's why he says on Yontif it's not part of the Ola Minyan. Everyone agrees it's not Ola Minyan Shiva. So in fact it uproots the Shiva. So therefore you can't have Nehuge Avelis, even B'tzina, and that's why you can't have Nehuge Avelis before the Kvura, because only from the Kvura we Ola Minyan Shiva. And the Rosh holds no. There is a concept of Nehuge Avelis independent of counting the days of Shiva. And in fact, it seems to be a raya for the Rosh and a kasha on the Rambam. The Gemara, the Mishnah tells us in Moed Katan, Chav Zayin Amid Aleph 27a, that says that the mitzvah of Nicham Avelim, applies even on Yontif. There is a mitzvah to comfort the mourners even on Yontif. So at first glance, Bishchol Malaharash, this is good according to the Rush that says you have a form of Avelos on Yontif, Avelos B'tzina, so hence I can have a Nicham Avelim. But the Rambam can't argue with the Mishnah. How does the Rambam deal with the Mishnah that says you can have Nicham Avelim on Yontif, yet the Rambam says there's no Kazav Avelos on Yontif? So how do we reconcile the Rambam? So Reb Bitzal Zolti in the Mishnah Yavitz, a beautiful sefer, points out as follows: that according to the Rambam, according to the Rush, the Nicham Avelim on Yontif is no different than the Nicham Avelim during the week. You have Avelos on Yontif, so you're doing Nicham Avelim, so therefore it's a general rule of Nicham Avelim. But the Rambam, when he talks about, when the Mishnah says Nicham Avelim, that is only the Nicham Avelim on Yontif, that's out the Chesed Shel HaMeis. As we pointed out, that Nicham Avelos is a double kindness. Chesed Imachai, v'Chesed Imameis. So on Yontif, where there is no Avelos, so clearly there is no Chesed Imachai, there's no concept of Avelos, you can't have Nicham Avelim. But the Mishnah is talking about, it's a Chesed Imameis. He says, apparently that you can have on Yontif. So therefore, with this we can explain the Rambam. There seems to be an apparent contradiction. The Rambam in Hilchos Avelos writes Nicham Avelim Kodem Bikar Cholim, and the Gemara and the Rambam in Hilchos Avel Perek Yud Halacha Zayin says, no, the Rambam in Hilchos Lulav Perek Zayin Halacha Chaf Daled quotes from the Gemara in Sukkah Daf Mem Aleph that Bikar Cholim Kodem for the Nicham Avelim. So, with Rav Zolta, we can give a potential answer. The Rambam in Hilchos Avel, what is the reason why Nicham Avelim beats out Bikar Cholim? Because Bikar Cholim is just a Chesed Imachai, but Nicham Avelim is a Chesed Imachai, the Chesed Imameis. And hence Nicham Avelim Kodem Bikar Cholim. But the Rambam in Hilchos Lulav is at the din in Hilchos Yontif. He's talking about during Sukkot, when the laws of a Yontif apply and the laws of Avelos don't apply. According to the Rambam, you don't even have Avelos B'tzina on Yontif. So you only have Chesed. So Nicham Avelim is only Chesed Imameis. So the Rambam goes in with the general rule: if you have a choice to make, I can do a Chesed for the Chai or a Chesed Imameis. Which one takes precedence? So you go with the general rule: Chai beats out Meis. So therefore, when it comes to Hilchos Lulav, when there is no Chesed Imachai because there is no Beilis, so therefore he switches the order around. However, the Rush, who holds that Avelos B'tziner is Noheg on Yontif, so therefore the Nicham Avelim is still a double kindness on Yontif as well. Therefore, he has a different gersa in the Gemara. The Nicham Avelim would precede Bikar Cholim, consistent with the gersa, the Rush's gersa of Anshe Yushalayim. So that's the machlokas, the Rambam and the Rush, a fundamental machlokas regarding Avelos, whether you have Avelos B'tzina, and the nafkamina is a major nafkamina. All week long, Bikar Nicham Avelim beats out Bikar Cholim because it's a double kindness. The machlokas, the Rambam and the Rush is on Yontif. Do we say Nicham Avelim wins or Bikar Cholim? So the Rush says it's no different because he holds there's Avelos on Yontif, and therefore it's a double kindness. But the Rambam who holds there is no Avelos, there's only a Kvodo Shomeis. It's just a form of Nicham Avelim. Hence, the Rambam would say on Yontif, one should do Bikor Cholam first, and then Nicham Avelim. So even on mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, we make blessings. And in fact, the Minhag Ashkenaz is Afilu al Minhagim. Even on customs, we make a bracha. The classical discussion is on Hallel and Rosh Chodesh. We say Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, the Torah's Minhag, as a custom, not as a law. And therefore, we even make a bracha on that. Some Svardim do not. So therefore the question the Achronim, the commentators asked, the Rishonim, the Achronim is, if tzedakah is a mitzvah min haTorah, why don't we make a blessing before we give charity? So there are many answers to the question. There's a famous answer, the Tshuvas HaRashba. The Rashba writes, we're concerned that the poor person would not accept it, and therefore it'll be a bracha levatola, it'll be a blessing in vain, i.e., either let's say the ani is proud, he feels embarrassed, and he doesn't want to take it, or perhaps the other way, someone's expecting more money, or $10, I'm not taking this, and they throw it back at you. So whatever the scenario is, any mitzvah which is tole b'das acher, someone, we know everything's dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but certain things are under our control, whatever God gives us. So mitzvahs which are in our control, whether I'm to do it or not, so Chazal instituted a bracha. But mitzvahs dependent on someone else, so then we can't make a bracha, we don't have control over the other individual. So since it's totally b'das acherim, it's a discussion whether how you learn the Rashba, whether it's just categorically, if it's dependent on someone else, is no bracha, or the concern is because there's no bracha, we're concerned about a bracha of Atola. And in fact, what do we see from this Rashba? What do you mean it's a bracha of Atola? Let's say I give every morning, ensure they come around with the pushka, I put money in the pushka is not going to reject me, so why can't I make a bracha before I put money in the pushka, or give to some organization? So the answer we see from the Rashba is that the mitzvah of tzedakah isn't the maisa nesina, isn't the act of giving, but it's when the ani receives it. And therefore it's a result-oriented mitzvah. If you don't get the desired result, there is no mitzvah. And that's what Chazal tell us, that if someone is walking down the street, they drop $100 bill, and an ani picks it up, you fulfill your mitzvah of tzedakah, because the bottom line is you helped another individual. And therefore, that's the pshat in the Rashba. It's totally b'das acherim, and we see it's result-oriented, the mitzvah of tzedakah. It's not the ma'isa nesina, it's the result of helping out the other individual. And in fact, where else do we find this? We find this klal by another mitzvah. Another mitzvah we won't necessarily associate with tzedakah, the mitzvah of kiddushin, of getting married. There's a discussion among the Rishonim, the Rambam and the Rush. What is the nature of the mitzvah? When it's usually the Rabbi, but anyone who loves the Mesadik kiddushin, it's not the classical al mitzvahs kiddushin or kais isha. It's also one of us arayas, v'italanos anesuas. It's a very unique language in the bracha, and the Rishonim are bothered. Why the unique language? So the Rush concludes it must be a birkas shebach v'hodah. It must be a blessing of praise and thanksgiving, and that's why we have this language. And the Rambam learns, no, Kashen Shem Mavarach, just like you make a bracha before, on all mitzvahs, like the Gemara says in Psachim, so too, when it comes to Kedushin as well, first you make the bracha before you do the Ma'aseh Kedushin. So it seems to be a fundamental machlokas, the Rambam and the Ravid, on whether you make a bracha first, or you should make the bracha before or after. So the Rosh who wrote it, right, it's a Bircha Sheva Kvalda, you do it after, like when you have thunder and lightning, you're not going to make it before it happens. It's a bracha on the institution of marriage. According to the Rambam, it's on the Ma'aseh Kedushin, like all other mitzvahs. There's an interesting Ravid. The Ravid writes, he seems to take a in-between position. On one hand, he seems to agree with the Rambam that it's a Birkas HaMitzvah. However, he says you make the bracha after. To Bishlam, to the Rosh, he holds the Birkas Sheva Kvalda, so you make it after. And Bishlam, according to the Rambam, it's a Birkas HaMitzvah, you make it before. That's one nafkamina. And also, another nafkamina would be who should make the bracha. It's basically, is it the Chassan's mitzvah, Chassan and Kala's mitzvah? And therefore, if it's a Birkas HaMitzvah, in theory, the Chassan should be doing it, except not to embarrass, like we have by Abal Kori, not to embarrass the Chassan, we have someone else do it. But both the Rambam and the Rosh seem to be consistent with their views. That if it's a Birkas HaMitzvah, you make it before. It's a Birkas Sheva Kvalda, you make it after. But according to the Rabbi, what's the pshat? That it's a Birkas HaMitzvah, but you make it afterwards. So the Rabbi gives the same principle, because the concern is maybe the woman will say no. Maybe the woman you want to marry will say thanks, but no thanks, I'm not interested, or I changed my mind, or whatever. And therefore what the Rabbi says? It will be a bracha u'vatala. It will be a bracha in vain. And therefore he says one should make the bracha after. So the question is, so how come when it came to tzedakah, the Rashba doesn't say you make it afterwards? The Rashba just says you make the bracha, you don't make a bracha period on tzedakah. But regarding Hilchas Kedushin, the Ravid says you make it afterwards. So perhaps there are different reasons why. If that is the only reason, you're right. So then, L'chora, once the ani takes it, then there's no reason not to make a bracha anymore. So perhaps one of the distinctions is based on the Rambam. The Rambam writes that Chazal only instituted brachas on mitzvahs ben adam l'makam, mitzvahs between man and God, i.e. Kedushin. But mitzvahs ben adam l'chavero, Chazal never instituted brachas. So when it comes to Kedushin, it's a mitzvah ben adam l'makam. So therefore, okay, so the Rabbi says you can't do it before, you do it after, kind of like the Gemara's case by a ger. In other words, that's the shaila. There are actually different gerses in there. Someone to bring a raya. The Gemara Psachim specifically gives the example of geras as making a bracha after. It seems to go against the Ravid. And others want to point out, no, some have a gersa that it also throws in Kiddush, but even if you don't, some want to make a distinction anyway, because that is talking about a case where it's Yefshar, a case where it's impossible to make a bracha because he or she is not Jewish. So they want to make a distinction between Kedushin and Geras. But either way, based on the Rambam wants to make a distinction, but Adam HaChavero, no bracha, but Adam HaMakom bracha. And as we explained many times, the reason is, imagine someone comes to your door hungry, they ask for food, you're moved and you run into the kitchen, you get the food, and you're about to give the poor person the food, you say, wait a second. Baruch Atah Hashem, you start making a bracha, in the interim the person faints from starvation. So clearly Chazal didn't want to institute a bracha where it interferes with the fulfillment of the mitzvah. And therefore, Chazal said, no bracha on Ben Adam HaChavero. So even though the Rabbi would say by Kedushin, you could make a bracha after, perhaps that's by a Birkas HaMitzvah. That's by a mitzvah ben adam l'makam. But a mitzvah ben adam l'chavero, so then according to the Ram, you would make a bracha, well, before or after. Well, I guess if the sole reason is this Be'elam Chavero. So I guess in theory Chazal could have instituted to make a bracha afterwards, because now you're not worried about the person not doing. Maybe they felt that if you're worrying about the bracha afterwards, you won't do the mitzvah properly beforehand. So whatever the reason, Chazal never instituted a birkas ha-mitzvah on the mitzvah of tzedakah even afterwards. And there, and there are other reasons as well why they bring down, let's say, the mitzvah of tzedakah, let's say, or bikar cholim, visiting the sick. The Chazal talk about whether you should visit your enemy or not. Let's say somebody you haven't hit it off with, and you walk in there, oh hi, how you doing? Baruch atah Hashem. He thinks you'll be gloating over his sickness, over his illness, and make a bracha. He's so happy. And also with tzedakah, someone's an ani, someone's poor. You shouldn't be celebrating over someone else's sorrow. So therefore Chazal felt it didn't look right. You go in, because when you make a bracha, you're supposed to make a bracha b'simcha. So therefore to go in and do nicham avelim, comforting the mourner, bikor cholim, tzedakah, these are things which are of course sorrow to an individual. They lost their loved one, that person's sick, or they're ani. Therefore Chazal didn't feel it appropriate to set up a bracha in these contexts. These are some of the many reasons the Rishonim and Achronim discuss, and even though everyone agrees that the mitzvah of tzedakah is a mitzvah, and depending which aspect with a mitzvah and a Torah mitzvah midrabanan, and bikar cholim, nicham avelim, lehavta re'echa kamocha, they're all under the rubric of lehavta re'echa kamocha, whether the specific act is mandated biblically or rabbinically, but the whole concept is biblical. These are the different reasons why Chazal did not institute a bracha, either as the Rashba says, because we're afraid the ani might say no, it'll be a bracha l'batola, or according to the Rambam, a mitzvah be'elam chavero, or like others, you don't want to look like you're celebrating the sorrow of others, and therefore Chazal never instituted a bracha by when someone's an ani, someone is sick, or someone has to do nicham avelim. So there's a famous question the Mefarshim, the commentators, ask regarding many mitzvahs ben adam lechavero, many interpersonal mitzvahs, be it hachnosas archim, entertaining guests, bikor cholim, visiting the sick, nicham avelim, comforting the mourner, the mitzvah of burial, and we could go on and on. And we all know these are strong mitzvahs in the Torah, and whether they have a source min ha-Torah, or there's a general mitzvah of chesed in the Torah, and the specifics maybe are only rabbinical. Whatever you want to assume the source is, they're clearly mitzvahs, and minimally mitzvahs midrabanan, probably biblical mitzvahs. So the question the commentators ask is, the Gemara tells us in Psachim and Dav Zayin that usually before, sometimes after, but usually before we perform a mitzvah, we make a bracha. Like before we put on a talis, a tefillin, eating matzah, we have a general rule. First we make the bracha, and then we do the mitzvah. It's called over lasiyason. First the bracha, then the mitzvah. So the question is, where is the bracha regarding bikar cholim, hachnosas archim, all these mitzvahs be'em chavero? Where are the brachas?
We don't do the bracha.
So there are many different answers. We'll touch on one or two now. One is the famous answer of the Or Zarua. The Or Zarua writes that since bikar cholim, hachnosas archim, these are mitzvahs she'ein lehem shir. These are mitzvahs that don't have a set limit. In other words, it's 24/7, and even though you can always go visit someone, even though, of course, as we mentioned over Shabbos, that the person who was visiting the Brisker Rav who wouldn't leave.
Yes. No. Yes.
Exactly. So therefore, and he says, I feel mea pamim. You can visit somebody even 100 times.
Right.
So therefore, we see it's all day. So how come? So he says, since it's a mitzvah she'ein lahem shiur, therefore he says there is no bracha. The question is, who says that? Is that true? That on a mitzvah tamidis you don't make a bracha because it's all the time? Which bracha do we make on a mitzvah which is all the time? We make it every morning, and we're doing it now. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of learning Torah, that's a 24/7 mitzvah. Of course, you have to take off time for eating, sleeping, working, relaxing. But every other minute you have to be learning Torah. Anytime you don't need a fetid, so it's a 24/7 obligation. So, and yet we know we make not only one bracha, we make many. Lasok b'divrei Torah, b'harevna. So what do you mean? So what does the Or Torah mean? On a mitzvah that isn't a shiur, we don't make a bracha. What's the distinction between Talmud Torah and one, which seems to be the exception to that rule, that even though it's a 24/7 mitzvah, we do make a bracha, and all the other mitzvahs which are continuous, we do not make a bracha. So perhaps the distinction is as follows: that there's a concept of if someone takes a neder, someone takes a vow, I'm not going to get benefit from Reuven, Shimon, Levi, whoever. And then Reuven gets the new iPhone 5, he gets the mini iPad, he gets a new computer, whatever the case may be, and then the person wants to borrow it, so the answer is no. He took a neder not to get hana. However, let's say he took the same neder not to get benefit from Reuven, but come Sukkot time, he doesn't have a lulav and esrog, and Reuven's the only one who has one. Can he borrow his lulav and esrog? The answer is yes. Could he borrow his tefillin? Yes. Could he borrow his talis? Yes. So what's the difference? How come if he took a neder not to get benefit, when it comes to a mitzvah we say it's okay? Because the Gemara tells us in Rosh Hashanah, mitzvahs lav lahanos nitnu, that the purpose of mitzvahs is not for our own personal benefit. That's a whole discussion on what it means, but basically mitzvahs you're not getting hana from, it's not for your own benefit, you're doing it for God, etc. So therefore when you take a neder not to get personal benefit, you don't have in mind mitzvahs. However, comes along the Taz and says, this is true by all mitzvahs except one. By all mitzvahs, it's a lav lahanos nitnu. The purpose of it isn't to benefit. But there's one mitzvah specifically, it's lahanos nitnu. And that's the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. The purpose of Torah is to benefit, is to enjoy the learning. In fact, the Iglei Tal, one of the Hasidic Rabbi, writes in his introduction to his Sefer, in Hilchos Shabbos, he says, people have this erroneous impression. They think, what's the highest level of Torah Lishma? What's the highest level? Find something it's very boring to you, you have no interest, and then force yourself to study that. That's the highest level. He says it's all wrong. That's the lowest level. The highest level is the geschmack, is the enjoyment of learning, and he points out that's what Talmud Torah is different. Talmud Torah, and that's why in fact, but if someone takes a neder not to get benefit, so therefore you can't use his sefer because Torah is lahanos nitnu, and therefore you can't get benefit. So it comes along. So that's the difference. That the reason why the Or Zarua says that on a mitzvah tamidis you can't make a bracha. Why can't you make a? So what? It's a 24/7 mitzvah. So let me just make it once a day or before I do it. So he says because you'll be lacking the chivav, the chaviv. We're all familiar when you make a shechiyano, you have to do it on something which happens once in a while when you're excited. But that's also true to a certain extent by all brachas. As you heard at Shalosh Shidduch, the bracha is the wow factor. Oh wow, I can have this fruit, I can have this fish, etc. So when you make a bracha, it's supposed to be the excitement. So therefore, if something which is all the time, Chazal didn't institute a bracha because the whole purpose of the bracha is to get you excited about it. If it's 24/7, you're not going to get excited. Because that's by classical mitzvahs Rav Lahanos. When it comes to Torah, every day is a new day. Every time you learn is a new experience. And therefore, when it comes to Torah, you're going to have the excitement, and therefore you make a bracha all the time. So therefore that's the difference. So when it comes to all the mitzvahs, be'adam l'chavero, bikor cholim, hachnasas chalo, all etc., since it happens all the time, you're going to be lacking the excitement, hence no bracha. Talmud Torah is an exception to the rule, because the whole purpose of Talmud Torah is to get benefit. So that's the Or Zarua. We'll do one other one. One other is a famous answer of the Tshuvas HaRashba. The Rashba writes that, or we'll discontinue without the Rashba, this along the lines of the Rambam. The Rambam's opinion is that Chazal never instituted brachas on mitzvahs ben adam l'chavero. They only introduced brachas on mitzvahs ben adam l'makom. And the commentators explain different reasons. The Aruch HaShulchan gives a reason, Mefarshim give different reasons, but one of them is because it doesn't make any sense to institute a bracha on a mitzvah ben adam l'chavero, because the whole purpose of Bikor Cholim is to show your concern, how you're doing, how you're feeling. In fact, it's a separate discussion. Are you allowed to go visit an enemy, a soneh, because it might be taken the wrong way, especially when you're making the bracha. Oh, I'm so happy. Good to see you. Let me make a... You might be taking it that you don't want him to come out of the hospital. So in general, that's a separate issue. But the purpose of Bikor Cholim is to make the person feel better and cheer them up. So you say, by the way, 1 second, you know why I'm here? I don't really care about you. But God said I have to do Bikor Cholim. So Asher Kiddush Shalom. So you want to de-emphasize the commandment, even if it's true, it is a mitzvah, but you want to show that you're here for your concern. How could I get you? What could I get for you? And therefore, any time a bracha is going to get away in the mitzvah, so therefore Chazal said no bracha. So those are two of the many reasons why we don't make a bracha on a mitzvah and a chaver. In fact, the Or Zarua is dvarim she'ein lehem shir. It's something that doesn't have a time. Talmud Torah, but Talmud Torah is chaviv and it's new every time, but mitzvahs Rav Lahanos is new. And like the Rambam writes, any mitzvah adam l'chavero, we don't want the bracha to get in the way of the performance of the mitzvah.